It was just past midnight when I realized the life I thought I knew was gone forever. My own grandson's wife was whispering in the kitchen, and the words that slipped through the door froze my blood. Tomorrow, she won't be here anymore. We've made the arrangements. My knees shook, but my mind became sharper than it had in decades. I grabbed my shawl, my bag, and my dignity, and slipped into the night. That was the moment I decided, no one would ever decide my fate again. My name is Evelyn, I am 90 years old, and for the last 7 years I believed I had a home inside the walls of my grandson's house. After my husband passed away, I sold my small townhouse thinking it was the right thing to do. Marcus, my only grandson, showed up with tears in his eyes, begging me not to live alone. "Grandma, you belong with us. We're family. We need you." His words broke my heart, and at the same time filled me with comfort. I thought I was blessed to still be wanted, still be needed. So, I gave up the little space that was mine, my independence, and moved into his large home with his wife Clarissa. At first, it seemed like a dream. Clarissa welcomed me warmly, Marcus kissed my cheek every evening, and I felt useful again, helping with small tasks and baking pies on Sundays. For a woman my age, it felt like I had been given a second chance at family life. But what starts sweet can sour in silence. Slowly, things shifted. Clarissa's compliments turned into disguised complaints. "Evelyn, maybe you shouldn't eat dessert, you know, at your age. Or, perhaps you could stay in your room when we have friends over. It makes the house feel less crowded." Marcus nodded in agreement, telling me that rest was important. Rest, such an innocent word twisted into a command for invisibility. At first, I ignored it. I convinced myself it was just stress, that young couples sometimes said careless things, but the tone grew sharper, and the looks colder. The warmth of family was being drained out, leaving only tolerance thin, fragile, and bitter. The months rolled on, and humiliation became part of my daily bread. Clarissa stopped setting my plate at the dinner table. "If you want something, you know where the kitchen is," she would say, smiling with that same sweet venom. Marcus would walk in from work, kiss her lips, and barely look at me. At night, behind the walls, I overheard their real feelings. "She's too slow, Marcus," Clarissa hissed. "Every little thing takes her forever. We can't do this much longer." His response pierced me deeper than her cruelty. "I know, but she's my grandmother." "Exactly," Clarissa snapped. "She's yours, not mine. And I didn't marry you to live with an old woman." I froze by the doorway one night, a dish in my hand trembling, listening to them talk, as if I were some piece of furniture too heavy to move. I felt invisible, discarded, like the years of love I had poured into Marcus since he was a boy meant nothing. They didn't see me as the woman who raised him when his parents died, who worked as a seamstress for 40 years to make sure he never went without. To Clarissa, I was just a burden. To Marcus, I was a duty that grew heavier with each passing day. But I am not just anyone's burden. I am Evelyn, and behind the gentle smile they had taken for weakness, I held secrets. For all those years, while they assumed I had nothing left, I had been careful. My husband and I built more than just a life together. We built security, properties, savings, investments I had never once spoken about. Clarissa thought she was marrying into a family with only a frail old woman attached. What she never knew was that I carried more power in silence than she and Marcus could ever imagine. That night, when I heard the whispers about arrangements, about tomorrow, I knew what those words meant. They wanted me gone, not dead, but erased. Shipped off to a facility where no one would see me, where I would wither away in a bed while they lived freely without the weight of my presence. They underestimated me. They mistook my age for weakness, and my quiet for surrender. But what they did not know, what they could never have guessed, was that I still had fight left in me. That night, I chose freedom. That night, I chose myself. The clock had just struck 1 when I sat on the edge of my narrow bed, the silence of the house pressing down on me like a weight. Clarissa's laughter drifted faintly from the master bedroom upstairs, a cruel reminder of how comfortable she had grown while I shrank into the corners of their lives. I held my small leather purse against my chest, my fingers trembling as they traced its worn seams. Inside were my most precious documents, a little cash, and the credit card Marcus assumed was nearly empty. He never asked, and I never offered. It was safer that way. I waited, heart pounding, until the house was quietened, till even their whispers had melted into the steady rhythm of sleep. Then, I rose. For 90 years, my feet had walked church aisles, factory floors, and crowded city streets. And that night they carried me softly to the back door, each step steadier than the last. When the cool night air touched my face, it felt like the first breath of life after drowning. I did not know where I would go, but I knew one thing with certainty: I was never going back. The streets were empty, lit only by flickering lamps and the occasional glow of passing headlights. I pulled my shawl tighter around my shoulders, walking farther than I had in years. The pain in my knees was sharp, but my determination was sharper. At last, a cab appeared, its yellow light breaking the darkness like a beacon. I raised my hand, and when the driver asked where I was going, I answered without hesitation: the Grand Royal Hotel. He looked at me in the mirror, perhaps wondering what business an old woman had at such a place in the dead of night, but he said nothing. When we pulled up to the grand entrance, the marble columns gleaming even in the moonlight, I felt a strange thrill. I had walked into that hotel only once before in my life. As a young woman sewing gowns for wealthy ladies who sipped champagne in its ballroom. Now, I was returning on my own terms. The receptionist blinked at me when I stepped into the lobby. 90 years old, carrying only a purse, dressed in clothes far too modest for such a palace. But when I slid the black card across the counter, her expression shifted instantly. The presidential suite, I told her, for as long as I decide. Within minutes, I was riding the elevator up to the top floor, my reflection staring back at me in the golden doors. The woman who looked back was tired, yes, but her eyes glimmered with something that had been buried for too long: defiance. The suite was larger than the house I had just fled. High ceilings, velvet curtains, a balcony that overlooked the city skyline like a crown of jewels. I dropped my purse on the bed, sat down on the silk covers, and for the first time in years, I smiled. A wide, unbroken smile that came not from politeness, but from liberation. At dawn, my phone buzzed violently on the nightstand. Marcus, then again, then Clarissa. Messages flooded in. Grandma, where are you? We're worried. Please call us. This isn't like you. We love you. Come home. Lies wrapped in concern. Their words didn't sting anymore. They rolled off me like rain on glass. I ordered breakfast instead: eggs, sausages, berries, fresh bread still warm from the oven. As I ate on the balcony, watching the sun rise over the city, I imagined their panic. Searching rooms, calling neighbors, maybe even the police. For once, it was them losing sleep, not me. After breakfast, I began to think clearly, not as a victim but as a woman in control. My first call was to the bank, to confirm what I already suspected. The years of quiet investment had borne more fruit than I had dared hope. The numbers read back to me by the banker made my heart skip. Enough to live not just comfortably, but powerfully. My second call was to Mr. Lawrence Harris, a family lawyer I had known since my husband's passing. His voice was calm but firm. Evelyn, if what you're telling me is true, they may have crossed the line into elder abuse. We have options, many options. And then the third call, to Sylvia, an old friend who had once sold me property downtown. Sylvia, I said, remember that apartment you told me about years ago? The one you said was waiting for me when I was ready to be independent again. Find it. Today. My phone kept buzzing with their desperate attempts, but I ignored it. Each unanswered ring was a chain breaking free, each silence a reminder that my life was finally mine again. Clarissa and Marcus had mistaken kindness for weakness. They had mistaken age for surrender. But I had only been silent, not defeated. And now, my silence was over. By the time the clock struck noon, I was no longer the frightened woman who had crept through the back door in the dark. I was dressed in a clean blouse, a pressed skirt I had folded carefully into my purse, and I was ready to face the day like a woman reborn. I descended into the hotel lobby, where the marble floors reflected chandeliers that sparkled brighter than the lies Clarissa had whispered about me. I made my way to the salon inside the hotel. "Special occasion?" the stylist asked, her hands already reaching for my silver hair. "Yes," I told her, staring at myself in the mirror. "The first day of the rest of my life." As she worked, curling and trimming, painting my nails a delicate shade of rose, I could almost feel my old self, the seamstress, who once held her head high, stitching herself back together again. That afternoon, I took a cab to the financial district, where the skyscrapers loomed like monuments to ambition. Lawrence greeted me in his office, his face grave as he poured me tea. I told him everything, sparing no detail. The whispers, the humiliations, the plan to send me away like I was nothing more than an abandoned coat left behind. His pen scratched furiously across his notepad as I spoke, his brow furrowed deeper with each word. When I finished, he looked at me with something I had not seen in a long time: respect. "Evelyn, you understand how serious this is. They could face charges, not just for emotional abuse, but possibly for attempting to commit you against your will. Do they know about your finances?" I shook my head, and he almost laughed. "Then you have more power than you think. They believe you're helpless. That is their mistake. We can turn this entire situation in your favor." I left his office with a sense of strength I hadn't felt since my 40s. On the street below, the city buzzed with life, but inside me, something buzzed louder in awakening. They had wanted to bury me in silence, but I was going to rise in a way they would never forget. I had a plan forming, one that would take patience, but oh, it would be worth it. I was going to show Marcus and Clarissa who I really was, not the frail grandmother they dismissed, but a woman who had lived, worked, and survived 90 long years. That evening, I returned to my suite with bags of new clothes, elegant dresses, sharp suits, shoes that clicked against marble like a declaration. For too long I had dressed as though I were fading, clothes in dull shades, worn from years of use. That ended now. My reflection no longer whispered weakness, it shouted resilience. When Marcus called again, I answered at last. His voice cracked with what he hoped sounded like concern. "Grandma, thank God, where are you? We've been searching everywhere." His tone was desperate, but I could hear the tremor beneath it: fear. Not fear for me, but fear of losing control. "I'm safe," I told him calmly. "That's all you need to know." He pressed harder. "Come home, please. We can talk this out." I let his words hang in the silence before I answered. "We will talk, Marcus. But it will be when I decide, where I decide, and on my terms." I hung up before he could reply, my hands steady, my heart stronger than ever. That night, as the city lights glittered outside my window, I sat down to dinner alone. Lobster, fresh bread, wine poured into crystal. Each bite tasted of freedom. I raised my glass to the reflection in the window. To the woman who had been underestimated, ignored, dismissed, into the woman who was returning with fire in her veins. They thought they had cornered me, but they had only set me free. Morning arrived, dressed in golden glass, and with it Sylvia's message. She had keys to a riverfront loft on the 12th floor of a restored warehouse. All brick bones and steel beams, the kind of place that remembers every story it shelters. I rode there in a quiet car, my palms flat on my skirt, breathing slowly like I used to before threading a needle. The elevator opened to a corridor that smelled faintly of lemon oil and old books. And when Sylvia swung the door wide, the city poured in at once, bridges like silver ribbons, water folding into light, trains gliding in the distance like patient animals. The loft had tall windows, a long terrace, a kitchen that begged to be lived in, and a bedroom with a view east, so honest you could count the clouds and forgive the days. "If you want it, it's yours this afternoon," Sylvia said. I didn't haggle, didn't blink. "1 year, paid in advance," I answered, and slid a cashier's check across the counter she'd set up on a packing crate. Her eyebrows lifted, and then she smiled at me the way women smile when they recognize a fight well fought. I spent the afternoon choosing small things that meant freedom: white plates with a thin charcoal rim, A kettle that whistled like a bird, sheets cool as morning shade, a lamp with a brass pole chain that clicked with authority. Movers carried my few belongings from the hotel, while I stood at the window and watched gulls rewrite the air. When they'd gone, I made tea and sat on the floor with my back to the wall, letting the warmth travel through my hands. The phone rang and rang. Marcus, then Clarissa, then an unknown number that left a message from a social worker saying they'd been asked to conduct a wellness check. I called her back myself, voice steady. "Ma'am, I am well, residing by choice at my new address. I have food, medical care, and legal representation. Please note that any further assertions of incompetence are false and distressing." I heard the pause, the careful typing, and then her tone softened. "Thank you, Ms. Evelyn. We'll close the inquiry." Lawrence called next, his words brisk as a winter wind. He had obtained copies of texts Clarissa had sent to a circle of friends, little seeds of slander watered with emojis. "She forgets everything." She wandered off again. "We're the only ones keeping her safe." Lawrence's laugh held no humor. "Documented, time-stamped, and backed up," he said. "Also, I reviewed the deed on Marcus's house. 14 years ago, your husband recorded a life estate in your favor, a detail your grandson appears never to have read. In plain English, your consent is required for any sale or encumbrance, and you have occupancy rights superior to theirs, should you wish to exercise them." I leaned my head back and closed my eyes, not from triumph, but from the clean relief of the truth returning to its chair at the table. They had tried to turn me into a shadow in my own story, yet the ink of my life was still wet and legible. At dusk I walked the terrace, the wind tugging gently at my shawl. I thought of every Sunday ham I finished by lamplight, every coin I set aside in coffee tins before banks took me seriously, every time I told Marcus he was made for more than excuses. Age is not a cage, age is a ledger. It remembers who paid attention, and who only paid lip service. My plan clarified like a pattern chalked on fabric: not revenge, but revelation; not cruelty, but consequence. I would gather proof, I would set terms. And when the moment came, I would say my piece in a room where their faces could not hide behind walls. I brewed a pot of gumbo the way my mother taught me, okra soft as forgiveness, heat steady but honest, and ate at my new counter. Salt and smoke and history singing on my tongue. Then I wrote in a fresh notebook with a blue spine, dates, names, phrases. The way Clarissa's voice tilted when she lied, the way Marcus's guilt curled into anger when cornered. I am 90, black, and unafraid. My memory is an archive, and my dignity is non-negotiable. The river kept its own counsel beneath my window. I slept with the curtains open so the stars could testify that I had finally returned to myself. 3 days passed in my new loft, and with each sunrise I felt the weight of years peeling off like old wallpaper. My mornings began with strong chicory coffee and walks down the riverside promenade, cane in hand, shoulders back, nodding to strangers who looked at me not as a burden, but as a woman who belonged exactly where she stood. By noon, I sat with Lawrence in his glass-walled office, and together we laid out the bones of a strategy. "Evelyn," he said, tapping his pen against the desk, "they are already unraveling. Clarissa is frantic. She's called 3 clinics, pretending to inquire about geriatric evaluations. Marcus has contacted the police twice. Their desperation is evidence itself." He slid a folder toward me. Inside were printed bank statements, not mine, but theirs. Credit cards stretched thin, loans overdue, mortgage payments behind. "They were never supporting you," Lawrence explained. "You were propping them up. Without your presence to justify their lifestyle. Their house of cards begins to wobble." I traced the numbers with my finger, not with pity, but with a strange sense of justice. Life has a way of exposing the truth when lies grow too heavy. That evening Sylvia joined me for supper. She brought cornbread and gossip in equal measure. "They're telling everyone you've lost your mind," she said, shaking her head. "But honey, the way you're standing now, no one who sees you would believe it." We ate together. laughter bubbling between us like it used to when we were young women sewing dresses and dreaming about futures that seemed too far to touch. Before she left, Sylvia took my hands in hers. "Make them see you, Evelyn. Not as they want to, but as you are." Her words stayed with me long after the dishes were cleared. 2 days later, Lawrence called with a new idea. "Public exposure," he said. "Not in a courtroom, not in whispers, but in a room where their pride cannot escape. There's a real estate investors gala next week. High profile, full of cameras, reporters, and potential partners. Sylvia can get you on the list, not as a guest, but as a featured speaker." I felt a spark light in my chest, a fire I thought long extinguished. "You want me to stand on that stage and tell them who I am?" I said slowly. "Not just that," Lawrence replied, "but to show them that you are not a helpless grandmother. You are an investor, a woman of resources, a force they never imagined. The moment they see you in that light, their entire story crumbles." The plan began to grow roots. I spent the following days preparing, not with bitterness, but with precision. A tailor fitted me for a new emerald green suit, the color of life after storms. Shoes polished, jewelry chosen carefully, a string of pearls from my mother. Earrings I had bought myself after my first big paycheck as a seamstress decades ago. Each piece carried history, proof that I was not built yesterday. As I stood before the mirror, I saw a woman who had been tested, bent, but never broken. Meanwhile, the messages from Marcus and Clarissa shifted in tone. At first they pleaded, then they demanded. By the 5th day, the threats began. "Grandma, if you don't come back, we'll have to prove you're unfit. We'll have no choice." I listened to their voices on voicemail, their words dripping with false concern and hidden knives, and instead of fear, I felt clarity. They were cornered, not me. They were trapped in the web they spun, and I had only to let them thrash until their own lies bound them tight. The night before the gala, I stood on my terrace and looked at the city glowing like embers below. My heart beat strong, steady, not like a woman waiting for permission, but like a woman who had written her own permission slip. Tomorrow, I would walk into a room full of strangers and reclaim my name. Tomorrow, Marcus and Clarissa would see me not as the frail old woman they wanted to discard, but as Evelyn, the woman who refused to vanish. The day of the gala arrived faster than I expected, yet I woke with a calmness that surprised even me. 90 years had prepared me for this moment. Every sorrow, every seam I stitched in silence, every prayer whispered in lonely nights, all of it had brought me here. I dressed slowly, savoring each detail, the emerald suit hugging my shoulders, the pearl necklace resting like a crown of memories against my chest, the shoes clicking confidently against the hardwood floor as I walked toward the mirror. The reflection staring back at me was not an old woman cast aside. It was a matriarch, a survivor, a force of her own making. My heart did not race with fear but with anticipation. Tonight, the world would see what Marcus and Clarissa had refused to recognize. I was not theirs to silence. When I arrived at the grand hotel ballroom, the chandeliers blazed like constellations, and the air carried the scent of polished wood, perfume, and ambition. Sylvia greeted me at the entrance, her smile both proud and protective. "You look magnificent," she whispered, squeezing my hand. They won't know what hit them. Investors, lawyers, and journalists filled the room, their conversations a symphony of deals and promises. Lawrence stood near the stage, his posture sharp, his briefcase full of documents ready for whatever storm might break. I took my seat near the front, and though heads turned, some curious, some respectful, I held my chin high. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Marcus and Clarissa entered half an hour later, dressed in borrowed elegance. Marcus wore the same navy suit I had bought him for his first job interview decades ago. It seemed stretched from years of neglect. Clarissa had chosen a red gown, shiny but cheap under the lights, her smile brittle, her eyes darting nervously across the room. They didn't notice me at first. They were too busy scanning for the mysterious opportunity they thought they had been invited to witness. But when the host announced my name and called me to the stage, the air around them shattered. I rose, each step deliberate, heels striking the marble floor like a drumbeat. Faces turned, hands clapped politely, and Marcus froze in disbelief. Clarissa's smile dissolved, her lips parting in shock as she realized who the visionary investor truly was. Standing at the podium, I let the silence stretch. My voice, when it came, was clear, unshaken. Good evening. My name is Evelyn, and I stand before you not simply as a woman of 90 years, but as someone who has learned the true cost of trust and the priceless value of independence. The audience leaned forward, curious. I spoke not of bitterness, but of lessons. I told them how easily love can disguise neglect, how quickly care can turn into chains when respect is lost. I spoke of investments made quietly over decades, not only in property and savings, but in dignity, in resilience, in the will to survive. My eyes found Marcus and Clarissa at the back of the room. Their faces were pale, their bodies stiff, as if the weight of truth had pinned them in place. I revealed nothing cruel, only facts. How silence had been mistaken for weakness, how kindness had been abused, how plans were whispered in shadows to discard me like an inconvenience. Gasps moved through the room, but I did not flinch. The greatest investment we can make, I concluded, is in ourselves. Because when the day comes that others forget your worth, you must be strong enough to remember it. Applause rose like thunder, echoing through the ballroom. I stepped back from the podium, my heart steady, my smile unwavering. Marcus lowered his head, unable to meet my gaze. Clarissa clutched his arm, her face crumpled with humiliation. And for the first time, I felt not revenge, but release. The rest of the evening unfolded like a victory I had never dared dream of. Investors approached me, shaking my hand, congratulating me on my words. Journalists scribbled notes, some asking for interviews, and Marcus and Clarissa. They slipped quietly toward the exit, their shoulders hunched, their pride shattered. I watched them go, not with anger, but with a quiet satisfaction. They had built a story in which I was the helpless character. Tonight, I had rewritten the ending. The morning after the gala, the city felt brighter. Not because the sun was kinder, but because the fog inside me had burned away. I brewed chicory coffee and reread the notes Lawrence had drafted overnight, a package as precise as a surgeon's scalpel. Inside was a letter of demand addressed to Marcus and Clarissa, written in language so calm it glowed like ice. It laid out the facts, the recorded life estate, my superior occupancy rights, the documented defamation, the attempts to coerce a geriatric evaluation under false pretenses, the messages implying forced placement. It did not threaten, it clarified. It did not shout, it verified. With it, he included a proposal not of vengeance but of boundaries, a formal no-contact agreement for 90 days while we conducted an independent wellness assessment of my choosing, written apologies retracting every claim about my confusion, reimbursement for the months they pocketed my pension deposits while claiming they supported me, and, should they wish to remain in the house, a compliance plan recognizing my authority under the deed, including counseling sessions with a certified mediator. If they refused, we would move to restraining orders and a petition converting occupancy back to me until further notice. The law, quiet and patient, was finally seated at my side. At noon, Sylvia drove me past their street. I didn't ask to stop. I only wanted to witness the ordinary world continuing without my permission to shrink. Children hopped over sidewalk chalk, a mail carrier whistled, a neighbor was pruning roses. Life moves forward, with or without apologies. My phone vibrated an unknown number. The caller identified herself as a friend of Clarissa's voice. Sick. We're just concerned, she said. Maybe you didn't understand their intentions. I let the silence do the work. Then I answered evenly. Understanding does not require approval. I decline both your concern and your revision. I hung up and watched a blue kite dive and rise above a schoolyard fence, its tail stitching the air like handwriting. Before dusk, Lawrence confirmed the courier had delivered our packet. We expected rage or denial, perhaps a sloppy counterstrike. What arrived instead was a text from Marcus at 6:14 p.m. No punctuation, just raw words tumbling. Grandma, please meet me anywhere. No Clarissa, just me. I need to talk. I stared at the screen. 1,000 memories gathering at the door of my ribs. His skinned knees at 7. His graduation smile at 20. The day he promised he'd never let me be alone. I chose a public place, bright and neutral, a conservatory cafe that smelled of citrus and damp soil. I sat beneath glass and vines while a fountain wrote the same syllable over and over. Now, now, now. Marcus arrived with his tie askew and his eyes rimmed red. He stood there, unsure how to fold himself into the chair across from me, as if his body had forgotten the grammar of humility. Grandma, he began, voice hoarse. I didn't know it would go this far. I watched him, not as a judge, but as a ledger. It went exactly as far as you pushed it, I said softly. He winced, words spilled. Clarissa's jealousy of the attention I received from his colleagues when they visited. His embarrassment at our old car smell in a driveway lined with leased imports. Their spending, their fear, their late notices stacked like shingles. None of it surprised me. Shame is a clumsy puppeteer. It yanks people until they confuse cruelty for control. I thought I was protecting our marriage, he whispered. I told myself I was protecting you. I leaned in, my voice a thread pulled through cloth. Protection that steals a person's voice is not protection. It is captivity in a pretty room. He asked for forgiveness, the way tired men asked for chairs. I did not give him absolution like a stamp. I gave him terms like a scaffold. You will sign the agreement. You will attend counseling. You will correct every lie you allowed to walk around wearing my name. And you will learn the difference between duty and love. He nodded, rapid, desperate, and Clarissa. He asked, not meeting my eyes. Clarissa is an adult, I replied. She will choose the mirror or the mask. The mirror is hard. The mask is easy. Either way, I won't be the face she hides behind. When I left the conservatory, the evening flowers had opened moon-white trumpets, breathing sweetness into the dark. My cane struck the stone path in a rhythm I recognized from youth, the stubborn cadence of a woman who refuses to be revised. Back at the loft, I wrote another page in my blue-spined notebook. The exact minute Marcus apologized. The words he used, the places his sentences broke apart like thin glass. Record-keeping is not pettiness. It is how survivors make a reliable map of the country they crossed. I placed the notebook beside my bed, turned off the lamp with its brass chain, and let the river's hush move through the open window. Tomorrow would bring signatures, or stalling, contrition or theater. Either way, my course was set. I slept not as an exile, but as a sovereign, resting in her own borders. The following week unfolded like a careful symphony, each note measured, each pause intentional. Lawrence informed me that Marcus had signed the agreement almost immediately, his desperation inked in shaky handwriting. Clarissa, however, refused. Her message was curt, brittle as dry leaves. I will not be humiliated into submission. The arrogance of her words was almost comforting. It confirmed she had learned nothing. I was not surprised. Some people wear pride like armor, even when the seams cut their own skin. But her refusal did not rattle. MIT only proved what Lawrence had predicted. She will fight herself into the corner, he told me. All we must do is let her. Meanwhile, I embraced my new routine with the kind of joy I hadn't felt since girlhood. Mornings began with slow stretches by the river, cane tapping softly against stone. Afternoons were spent reviewing paperwork, but evenings belonged to myself. I filled them with music from old records. Billie Holiday's voice drifting through the loft, each lyric stitching memory to hope. I cooked gumbo, roasted chicken, even baked sweet potato pies, sharing slices with Sylvia when she visited. The woman who had once been reduced to silence at someone else's table was now the hostess of her own story, but the threats persisted. One night, just past midnight, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Clarissa, her voice sharp and frantic. If you don't stop this performance, we'll have you declared unfit. We'll prove you're losing your mind. Everyone already believes it. I listened once, then again, then forwarded the message directly to Lawrence. His reply was quick, almost amused. "She's digging her own grave," he wrote. "Each threat adds weight to our case. Let her keep talking." For the first time, I realized that silence, my old survival tool, was no longer my shield. Truth was my armor now, and every lie she spoke only polished it brighter. A few days later, Sylvia and I attended a luncheon hosted by a women's business collective. I was invited not as a guest, but as a speaker. The organizers wanted me to share how I had maintained financial independence into my 90s. Standing before a room of bright-eyed professionals, I told my story, not the intimate betrayals, but the lessons learned. I spoke about saving coins in coffee tins, buying small properties when no one thought a seamstress could, and the importance of never signing away one's dignity for convenience. When I finished, the applause was warm, genuine, like sunlight filling a cold room. Women gathered around me afterward, thanking me, asking questions, calling me inspiring, and in their eyes, I saw not pity, but recognition. I was no longer invisible. That evening, I received a call from Marcus. His voice trembled, softer this time, stripped of its earlier bravado. "Grandma," I signed, "I'm trying, but Clarissa. She says I'm weak, that I let you control everything. She's threatening to leave." His confession was both a plea and a warning. I answered gently, "Marcus, weakness is not in signing. Weakness is in refusing to admit when you're wrong. You are not weak for honoring truth. You are weak only if you continue to excuse cruelty." He wept quietly before hanging up. For a moment, my chest ached, not for him, but for the boy he once was, the boy who trusted me with his scraped knees and broken toy cars. That boy still lived inside him, but whether he survived depended on Marcus alone. Later that night, I stood on the terrace, watching the river glow under the moonlight. I whispered to myself, "Evelyn, you are still here, not as a shadow, not as a burden, but as a woman who chose herself." 90 years had not diminished me, they had refined me. Clarissa could deny, rage, scheme, but I had already won. Because the greatest victory was not the signatures or the applause. It was the rediscovery of my own voice, louder and steadier than ever. 2 weeks after the luncheon, Lawrence called me with a tone that carried both satisfaction and gravity. "Evelyn, it's time," he said. "We've gathered enough." Their words, their threats, their financial records, it all paints a complete picture. We can either press charges formally or stage the revelation we discussed. I leaned against my window, the city lights flickering like stubborn stars. "The courtroom will bind them legally," I murmured, "but exposure will bind them to their own shame." Lawrence chuckled softly. "Then let us give them a stage they'll never forget." The opportunity arrived in the form of another gala, this one larger than the first. BROADCAST, live by a local news channel covering community leaders and investors. Sylvia, always quick with connections, secured my place on the speakers list. "This isn't just about your story anymore," she told me. "It's about every elder who's ever been silenced. When you speak, you're speaking for all of them." Her words burned deep in my chest, heavier than pearls. I was no longer fighting for myself alone. I was carrying the weight of countless voices that had been tucked away in quiet nursing homes, dismissed as burdens instead of celebrated as foundations. The night of the event, I entered the ballroom dressed in deep violet satin, the color of bruises that heal into strength. Reporters circled with cameras, flashes sparking like fireworks. When my name was called, I walked to the podium with a steadiness that came not from youth, but from survival. "Good evening," I began, the microphone amplifying not just my words, but my resolve. "My name is Evelyn, and tonight I want to tell you not about investments of money, but about investments of respect." I paused, letting silence sharpen the air. Then I recounted what too many fear to admit, the way affection curdles into cruelty, how love spoken in daylight can twist into schemes whispered at night. I didn't name Marcus and Clarissa outright, but every word painted their portrait with strokes too clear to deny. I spoke of betrayal, of threats, disguised as concern, of freedom stolen under the pretense of care. As I spoke, I saw movement at the back of the room. Marcus and Clarissa had entered, their faces pale, their posture rigid. They hadn't been invited, they had followed the scent of their own undoing. I did not falter, my voice grew stronger. We must never surrender our dignity to those who mistake age for weakness. Our voices are not relics. They are instruments. And tonight, mine plays for every elder who has ever been told to sit quietly while decisions are made over their heads. Applause swelled, genuine and fierce, drowning out the muttered protests from the back. Clarissa's face flushed crimson as people began to turn, recognizing her from the whispers that had long circled the community. Marcus lowered his gaze, unable to meet the light of truth. Afterward, journalists crowded around me, asking for interviews, quoting my words as if they were scripture. Sylvia stood beside me, her pride unmistakable. Lawrence handed out documents to reporters, evidence of financial mismanagement, screenshots of messages, proof of the life estate. Everything Clarissa had denied was now illuminated under 100 bright lights, and in that moment, I understood the true meaning of justice, not revenge, but revelation. They could no longer hide behind their narrative, because the world had seen the truth with its own eyes. That night, back in my loft, I sat with a cup of tea and listened to the city breathe. I thought of my husband, of the sacrifices we had made, of the years spent saving nickels and dimes, so that one day we would never have to beg. I whispered to the quiet room, "We did it, love." They thought I was finished, but I am still writing. The river shimmered beneath the moon, carrying my words away like a hymn. The days following that second gala moved like sunlight through curtains, gentle, but impossible to ignore. Reporters published my story in articles that reached far beyond the city limits. Headlines read, "Non-octogenarian investor reclaims her voice and elder abuse unmasked in the spotlight." People began to send letters to my loft, not with pity, but with gratitude. Some wrote of their mothers and fathers who had been silenced in similar ways. Others confessed their own guilt, realizing how easily neglect slips into daily routines. Each letter was a reminder that I was not alone, that my story was now part of a greater chorus. Marcus visited once more, this time without Clarissa. He came quietly, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes carrying years that had not yet passed. He stood at the edge of my terrace, hat in hand, and said, "Grandma, I've signed everything. I've started counseling. Clarissa, she's gone." His voice cracked on that last word, but I did not interrupt. He needed to let it spill. When he finally looked at me, I saw the boy I had raised flicker for just a second. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I only want a chance to prove I can be better." I nodded, not in surrender, but in acknowledgement. Forgiveness is not a gift we hand out like bread. It is a seed planted in rocky soil, and only time can decide whether it grows. Clarissa, on the other hand, disappeared from my life as swiftly as she had invaded it. Her pride would not allow her to face what had been revealed. I did not chase her. Some doors must remain closed, no matter how loudly regret knocks. In my loft, life settled into a rhythm I had almost forgotten was possible. Mornings with strong coffee, afternoons with music, evenings with friends who laughed without cruelty. Sylvia and I began hosting small gatherings for women, young, old, widowed, divorced, thriving. We sat around my long oak table sharing food, stories, and strategies for independence. I told them what I had learned, that security is not just about money, but about voice. That silence can keep you safe for a time, but truth will always set you freer. One evening, as the group left and the river shimmered beneath the stars, I realized the final truth. They had not taken 5 years from me. They had given me the clarity to reclaim the rest. 90 years on this earth, and still I was beginning again. That is the gift of survival. It is never too late to stand, to speak, to be seen. And now, my dear listener, I turn to you. If my story touched you, if you felt the weight of my words in your chest, I invite you to join this growing community. Subscribe to this channel, not just to hear my stories, but to share your own. Tell us in the comments what part of this journey spoke to you, what memories it stirred, what lessons you have carried from your own struggles. Let us become more than an audience. Let us be a family that listens, supports, and learns from each other. I want to hear from you. Did this story remind you of your grandmother, your father, a neighbor, or perhaps yourself? Share your voice. Your story matters, and when we speak together, no one can silence us. So, subscribe, leave your thoughts, and stay with me for the next chapter. Because as long as we have breath, we have power, and as long as we share, none of us walks alone.